Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and you're listening to the latest chapter of Tales from the Triverse, my science fiction, fantasy, detective serial. This storyline is called The Vanishing Star. This is part 2. Previously, Lola Stiles continues to recover from her wounds, while the war on Palinor intensifies. Outskirts of Cunac, Palinor, 3203, early Frostfield. They came before dawn. The noise woke young Poltrix from the nap that had overtaken his supposed guard duty. He snapped to attention, nearly falling from the wooden stool he'd carried up to the top of the watchtower. A sound like nothing he'd ever heard, almost like a huge gate, being opened and closed but extremely fast, or perhaps the flapping of a dragon's wings. It was not the sound of an animal, though. It was too metallic, too artificial. He squinted into the dim morning, the sandy dunes beyond the city walls stretching into the distance, the mountains far away, a road winding its route. Everything was grey, the only colour a subtle orange glow in the sky. The noise was louder, cacophonous, filling the air on all sides. And then he saw it. A flying contraption, long rather than wide, bars slung beneath, a glass dome on the front, and a shimmering haze vibrating above it. It descended into his view, moving fast, approaching the city wall. Poltrix did not recognise it, but that didn't matter. He reached for the bell that would sound the alarm. Something dropped from the side of the contraption, and a plume of smoke burst from its rear, propelling it towards the city walls. It took only a second for it to hit, a detonation of rock and sand and fire erupting from the impact. Another projectile was fired and the wall was down. From the dunes came an army, riding wheeled vehicles, some open-topped, others with revolving treads that left thick tracks. Turrets atop some of them boomed, sending a shockwave rippling across the sand. There was no need to ring the bell. Everybody in the city already knew that an attack was underway. From the horizon he saw more white smoke, arcing up into the sky higher and higher. A series of rattling booms shook the tower, each one signalling the city's doom. The arcs of smoke curved gracefully, completing their ascent and speeding back down towards the city. Poltrix rushed to the other side of the tower and flung open the window, just in time to see explosions rain across the neighbourhood in which he'd grown up. From where he stood, he saw markets obliterated, houses destroyed down to the foundations, trees shredded, irrigation waterways evaporated. He watched as skin was blasted from bodies, leaving only charred shadows. By the time the sun came up an hour later, half the city was flattened, and the rest had surrendered. The Appalan Rainforest. Pilpo liked being the messenger. She couldn't do magic, like Maxim, or Yana, or Darila. She wasn't a Koth, like Lycazra, so couldn't rip anyone's arms off. She never received the kind of combat training Christian specialised in, nor did she have his tactical brains. That didn't mean she was useless, though. She knew medicine, and she could climb. Sitting on a thin branch above the forest canopy, she looked out over the endless sea of trees. Sea was right. Making the climb, pushing through the leaves and emerging into the sunlight, always reminded her of swimming in the ocean and coming up for air. The Appalan trees were tall, the kind of tall that didn't exist anywhere else in the Triverse. The Akehu had a web of messengers at key points through the rainforest. Each only had a vague understanding of where the others were, just enough to send a messenger spell in the general direction, but not so much they could give away firm details during an interrogation. Pilpo carried a receptor that had been imbued by Maxim with a particular elemental signature, one that matched the spell being cast by the messenger on the other end. It was supposed to ensure that nobody could intercept and read the message, because it was a load of gibberish without both parts of the key. Pilpo didn't really understand it, but it seemed to work. She sat comfortably on her perch, tinkering with the receptor. Only the wind kept her company up there, and her thoughts. The seasons continued to slide by, the leaves starting to shift to a darker hue. It never became properly cold in the Appalan rainforest, not like up on the peak or the nights in Brulia. You had to be a detective to spot the changing of the seasons in the rainforest. Different animals, a shift in the density of insect clouds, New mosses and mushrooms and flowers. She sighed. If only their real detective would wake up. I'm just saying, Yana was saying, that it's the biggest unsolved mystery of our time. Christian rolled his eyes, not even trying to hide his irritation. It didn't bother him in the slightest if she found him rude. We don't have time for mysteries, Yana. The woman was obsessed with portals, as everyone knew. She was a brilliant wielder, formidable on the battlefield, and as the heir to one of the great houses, she also held significant political clout, should she wish to use it. Sometimes he wondered whether her obsession with 2-century-old magic spells was a way of avoiding talking about her inheritance. The rebel princess. She'd been a good bit of PR back at the start. There was a shout, and Pilpo came sliding down from above, hopping to the clearing floor. "Got a message," she called, unnecessarily. Always so enthusiastic, so energised. There was a time when Christian had valued that, had seen it in himself. Now it made him all the more tired. He took the cylinder and pulled out the script. "There's been an attack," he said, scanning down the page. "It's Kunak." He glanced up at Lycasra. They glowered, a low rattle in their throat. "Kunak. It was stable the last time we were there." The city-state of Kunak had been one of the first to be liberated. They'd removed the ruling house in one swift move, literally beheading it and handing it back to the people. No bloodshed, save for the lord and his family, and nobody had mourned their passing. He read the report out loud. "They came at dawn. This might be the last message we get out. The city is destroyed. Every street. They bombarded us with weapons I've never seen before. Not magic, mid-earth weaponry. Flying and on the ground." There was more detail, but he could read it later. Mid-earth had entered the fray then. After the new regime in London and the crackdown on portal travel, Christian had wondered if it would come to this. He'd run the scenarios with Lycasra, calculating the likelihood of a foreign actor becoming involved, and what it would mean. They'd expected an increase in funding or training, but provision of weapons hadn't been deemed a high probability. It couldn't be Max Earth. None of their technology worked at all on Palinor, and they'd never bothered to retrofit any of it using older designs and power sources. Plus, they wouldn't have the will. It had to be mid-Earth. It was Baltine and Brulia, cutting a deal with his counterparts in London and at the Joint Council. Styles had warned them about an alliance of bad actors across the Triverse, a limitless supply of weapons pouring through the Brulian portal. Perhaps Yana had a point after all. It was always the damned portals. There was another shout from across the camp. "Hey!" cried Zlati, jumping up and down and waving her arms. "Hey, everyone, come quickly! Lola's awake!" Some good news then, at least. Christian stayed in his seat, as did Lycasra. He watched as the others dashed across the clearing, as Darila burst from her tent. His eyes caught Lycasra's, and they stared at each other, neither needing to say anything. The war had changed. That meant they needed to change as well. Thanks for listening. You can leave comments, find many more chapters, and subscribe over on the newsletter at simonkjones.substack.com.